They didn't just sell a ring. They sold the last thing my fiancé ever touched. The one thing that still made him feel real. When I asked my mother where it went, she didn't even pause stirring her coffee. "Oh, that?" she said, like it was a missing umbrella. "We sold it. Mira needed healing. In Portugal. No warning, no apology, just silence. And a legal envelope on my pillow. Inside, a receipt, notarized. Signed. Final. Like my grief had been processed and filed away. But what they didn't know was that while they toasted Mira's rebirth under string lights and hashtags, I was quietly gathering pieces. Emails, voice notes, Milo's old messages. Truth they couldn't delete. I never planned revenge. I planned memory. And when the spotlight finally turned toward her at the gala, the last person Mira expected to speak was me. The morning I realized the ring was gone, I wasn't even looking for it. I had opened the drawer beside my bed to grab an old pen, and my eyes drifted instinctively to the back corner. The velvet box had always been there, tucked beneath a folded note I never reread and a candle I never lit. A quiet resting place for the one thing I still allowed myself to keep. But this time the space was empty. The drawer clicked shut again, then open. I checked a second time, then a third. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, tearing through scarves, opening jewelry boxes, flipping through piles of envelopes like maybe the ring had slipped into the wrong memory. But there was no wrong memory. There was only one. The day Milo had handed it to me with trembling fingers, grinning like someone who believed in something permanent. He'd saved for it for 2 years. He let me choose the stone. He insisted on engraving the words, "You see me." And I had? Every version of him, even the broken ones. Still wearing mismatched socks, I went downstairs, my chest already caving inward. My mother was in the kitchen, moving through her routine like nothing was fractured. When I asked about the ring, there was no shift, no guilt, just a casual tone, the kind used when talking about weather. She told me they sold it, just like that. The explanation was simple. It was just sitting there. Mira needed help. She's healing. In Portugal, no pause, no shame, just oat milk and detachment. My father, somewhere behind the newspaper, added his own rationalization. It's not like we were married. And that was that. I remember walking back up the stairs with my hands gripping the rail like a lifeline. Back in my room, I opened the drawer again, as if absence could reverse itself. The box was still gone, but the velvet cloth remained, navy blue, folded like a flag. Milo had stitched a tiny star on the edge, a small, clumsy thing, because I once told him that love felt like sky. Wide, quiet, and kind. Now, that cloth lay in my lap like a coffin lining. It wasn't just a ring. It was the last unbroken thing. The last piece of him I could still hold. And they had traded it away. For spa water, for hashtags, for someone else's transformation story. I didn't cry, not yet. But something inside me went still. Not numb. Just waiting. That evening, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was spiraling, though my parents would probably call it that, but because every time I closed my eyes, the empty velvet cloth reappeared behind my eyelids. I kept it beside my bed like a relic, afraid that if I tucked it away again, the final thread connecting me to Milo would vanish completely. When the silence became unbearable, I opened my phone. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe distraction, maybe reason, maybe something that hurt less than the drawer. What I found was Mira. She was live on Instagram, standing in front of some coastal cliff in Portugal, the wind choreographed around her sunlit curls. Her voice was soft, deliberate. Every sentence sounded like it had been written, edited, and practiced. And in her hand, she held something familiar, a silver ring glinting beneath a beaded bracelet. It was my ring, the one Milo designed. She didn't mention where it came from. She called it a symbol of release, a token of her past that had shifted into new energy. Then she smiled, raised a glass of green juice, and thanked her followers for their endless support. Her final words before ending the stream: Transformation is sacred, especially when it comes at a cost. I stared at the screen long after it went dark. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't rage. It was betrayal, not just the theft of a thing, but of meaning, of memory, of grief turned into a curated caption. It wasn't enough that they had taken the ring. Now it was decor. Now it was aesthetic. I could already see her next caption forming. Letting go of what no longer serves you. But it had served me. That ring had held a heartbeat. It had outlived the man who chose it and the silence that followed him. It had stayed, untouched, because some grief needs stillness. And stillness was never something Mira respected. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't send a message. I opened my laptop, created a folder, named it TRUTH. I dragged in Milo's last email, the appraisal, the engraving receipt. Then I opened Mira's livestream again, not to watch it, but to save it. Frame by frame, false word by false word. No plans yet, no revenge, just documentation. Because when someone tries to erase you quietly, the most powerful thing you can do is write everything down. By the next morning, the folder had grown. I hadn't meant for it to happen, it just did. Like breath returning after too long underwater. At first, it was simple. Receipts, design specs, a grainy photo of me and Milo at the jeweler's counter, both of us grinning like kids who believed in forever. But then came the voice memos. Then the transcripts. Then screenshots Mira probably assumed would disappear under the weight of time and algorithms. I wasn't obsessive. I was focused. The grief that once felt shapeless had begun to form lines. Structure, proof. Healing, I realized, isn't always about letting go. Sometimes it's about holding on so you can finally understand what was taken. Among the clutter, one file stood out. A podcast episode Mira had released just days before the live stream. Her voice was soft, melodic, coded in the language of spiritual detachment. She talked about people who, in her words, weaponize grief to avoid growth. She called them addicted to mourning. I listened twice, not because I needed confirmation, but because something inside me clicked. This wasn't ignorance. It was intentional. It was rewriting. I saved the audio. Then, for the first time in months, I opened the voice memo app and hit record. No script, no outline. Just breathe and truth. I spoke of Milo's quiet hands, of the way he always waited until I finished talking before he replied, of how he noticed when no one else did. I spoke of the ring, of what it meant, of what it held, and of the moment my mother turned grief into currency and handed it to someone more photogenic. When I finished, the silence in the room shifted. Not heavy, not empty, just earned. Later that evening, I pulled out a napkin Milo had once scribbled on during a slow brunch. He had written, in the curve of his slanted handwriting, "Don't let them take your voice or your worth." I slipped it into the back of the folder. The truth didn't need to trend. It didn't need to shout. It just needed to be there. Ready. For the moment, the story started to unravel. And in that folder, under a name no one else would think to search, I began building my quiet revolt. Before Milo, I never questioned my place in the family. I was the dependable one, the steady one, the one who didn't need much. If Mira was the sun, radiant, dramatic, impossible to ignore, then I was the gravity that kept everything from drifting, quiet, functional, fading into the background so she could glow. I never resented it. Not then. Not really. But while sorting through documents in the TRUTH folder, I found something I had forgotten existed. A scanned scholarship application. It had my name typed at the top, my teenage signature at the bottom, and a note attached in my mother's handwriting. "Thank you for stepping aside so your sister could apply. We know you'll understand. You always do." Mom, it hit me like a draft through a sealed room. I had let go of that dream. Willingly. Proudly. because I thought that's what older sisters did. But looking at it now, through everything I had begun to uncover, it didn't feel noble. It felt expected, scripted. Then came another memory, a night I hadn't let myself revisit in years. Mira was crying over a failed exam. She needed her GPA to improve to keep her scholarship. I had just received an award letter, one I had worked for, fought for. Our mother had smiled gently as she tore it up in front of me, murmuring how strong I was, how Mira needed this more. "You understand," she had said. That line became the chorus of my life. You understand. You're the strong one, the reasonable one, the one who never needs the spotlight. But strength, when never seen, becomes silence. And silence, when never heard, becomes decay. I sat back in my chair and stared at the glowing folder on my screen. This was never just about a ring. It was about a pattern, a life spent in service to someone else's narrative. Mira had always been allowed to burn, bold, reckless, radiant. I had always been expected to absorb the heat, but not anymore. I scrolled to the bottom of the folder and created a new subfolder, Before Milo. I wasn't rewriting history. I was reclaiming my place inside it, and for the first time, I saw myself not as background, but as witness. The invitation wasn't mine. It never was. I found the flyer by accident, pinned to the corkboard at the coffee shop where Milo used to sit and write blog posts about bad indie films. A women's gala, empowerment, leadership, light, all the words people used when they wanted to sound brave without actually touching anything raw. I skimmed past it until I saw her name, Mira Blaine, featured speaker. I laughed, quietly, bitterly. Mira, the voice of healing. Mira, wearing the ring that didn't belong to her, standing on a stage built with someone else's silence. It wasn't rage that rose in my chest. It was clarity, a cold, sharpening kind of clarity. I didn't want to ruin her. That's not what this was. I wanted to remind the room that Milo had existed, that grief had weight, that memory had witnesses. I hadn't planned to attend. But then I remembered the draft Milo had once written, an email he never sent, to that same organization, offering to fund a mentorship program for young women artists. It had sat in his laptop like an unfinished wish. So I sent it, on his behalf. A week before the gala, I made a donation under the name Langford and Blaine Foundation. Quiet, private, no name mentioned, no stage time requested. Just one condition, a short video tribute to Milo, placed just before the final speaker. No one asked questions. No one made the connection. The night of the event, I wore black, unadorned. I arrived 10 minutes early and slipped into the back row like shadow. From across the ballroom, I saw her, Mira. She didn't walk in. She floated, white silk dress, softly pinned waves. Our mother at her side, radiant and beaming like she had raised royalty, like I hadn't even existed. I didn't wave. I didn't flinch. I waited. The evening unfolded with predictable grace. A few women spoke. Some sincere, some rehearsed. The applause came in gentle waves. The wine poured freely. Cameras flashed. Mira posed. Then came the moment. She was introduced as a rising voice in women's wellness, an inspiration for thousands, a living example of healing. She stepped onto the stage with the confidence of someone who believed her own PR. Her voice was soft, calibrated, every sentence smooth, circular, clean. She spoke of letting go, of shedding grief, of choosing joy over suffering, and all the while I sat still, spine straight, hands in my lap, eyes locked, because I knew what was coming. She ended her speech with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and as the room prepared to applaud, the screen behind her flickered. Mira blinked. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. A video began. A still photo of Milo, sunlight in his hair, that crooked half-smile that only I knew meant mischief. Then my voice, not loud, but undeniable. My name is Ilara. Milo was my fiancé. Together, we designed a ring. He engraved it with the words, "You see me." It was never meant to be passed on, resold, or rebranded. Whispers stirred. Someone gasped. After he died, I kept that ring as the one thing I could still hold. It was taken from me, sold, and worn without consent. Mira stood frozen, her smile gone. Our mother covered her mouth. "This isn't about revenge," I continued. "It's about memory, about truth, about the people we erase to keep our narratives clean." A silence heavier than any applause filled the room. Tonight, I reclaim my voice, not to ruin anyone, but to say, he was real, I am real, and this matters. The screen faded to black. No one clapped. No one needed to. I stood, not for attention, not for confrontation, but because it was time. I walked through the room slowly. Dozens of eyes followed. I didn't rush. I didn't hide. A woman near the door whispered, "That was her fiancé." Another said, "She funded the event." Mira didn't move. Her hands clutched the podium like it was the only thing holding her up. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. As I stepped into the night air, something shifted inside me. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was weight, leaving, and the silence I carried for so long finally made it sound. The days after the gala moved like fog, slow, soundless, a little gray around the edges. I didn't check social media. I didn't read the comments. A few messages came in, some polite, a few stunned. None from Mira. I hadn't expected any. Instead, I buried myself in the studio. Langford and Blaine, two names carved into glass, now felt like my own skin. The tools knew my hands again. The fire hummed softly. The smell of metal and cedar filled the air, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space from my own life. Napa grew colder. The vines began to crisp and curl. I welcomed the silence. A widow came in, wanting a pendant from her late husband's cufflinks. A teenage girl just wanted to learn how to etch initials into silver. No one asked about the gala. Though one or two looked at me a little longer than strangers should, that was fine. Let them wonder. Then, one morning, I found an envelope at the door. No return address. My name, faint and handwritten. Inside was the ring. My ring, the silver band Milo had made real, now resting in the same navy velvet cloth he stitched with a star. Tucked underneath was a single note, one sentence. "I'm sorry, but too late." No signature, but I didn't need one. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood there, letting the weight of everything settle. That afternoon, I placed the ring and cloth inside a small glass case in the far corner of the studio. No spotlight, no price tag, just a plaque that read, "This piece is not for sale. It cost everything to make." And next to it, 5 small words, etched into brass. "She's not quiet anymore." Outside, the sky looked different. Not brighter, not bluer, just still. When I flipped the sign on the door to open, it wasn't for customers, it was for me, not for revenge, not for recognition, but because the voice they once buried had finally found its way back. And this time, it wasn't leaving.